Have you ever felt the crushing weight of being dismissed by the very people who are supposed to love you unconditionally? I have. I remember that Christmas like it was yesterday, though it was years ago. The air was thick with holiday cheer everywhere else, but for me it was suffocating. I had been scrolling through social media when I saw the invitations to my cousins, my aunts and uncles. Everyone was smiling, everyone was together, and I was nowhere to be found. My mom had texted me the night before with those words that would haunt me for weeks. This year it is better you stay home. Christmas is no place for losers. I blinked at my phone in disbelief, my chest tightening, a knot of anger and sadness forming that I could not shake. At first I tried to understand. I really did. I told myself maybe it was a joke. Maybe she didn't mean it the way it sounded. But deep down I knew better. This was deliberate. Every insult, every slight, every backhanded comment over the years had been building to this. They had always painted me as the underachiever, the failure, the child who could never get it right. And that Christmas, they made it official. They excluded me from the warmth and tradition, as if I had no right to belong. I sat there staring at the tree in my apartment window, decorated by my own hand, and felt the anger simmer. Not just the usual frustration, but a slow, calculated kind of fire, the kind that tells you to stop crying and start thinking. I knew immediately that this Christmas, I was not going to sit silently and let them write my story for me. I would reclaim it, but not in the way they expected. I would not yell, I would not beg, I would not confront. I would win quietly, carefully, and in a way they would never forget. I started small. I began documenting everything. Every text, every insult, every exclusion. It was meticulous, almost obsessive, but I needed the evidence. I had learned long ago that memories twist, that people rewrite history to suit themselves. If I wanted to make my point, if I wanted to assert that I was not the loser they claimed I was, I needed proof. Proof that I had been mistreated. Proof that I had endured. Proof that I could rise above. I channeled my energy into my work. I had a small online business, a modest freelance career, nothing that screamed wealth or success yet, but it was mine. Built entirely from the hours I spent alone, grinding while they were busy mocking my efforts. I doubled my output, reached out to new clients, expanded into areas I had been hesitant about before. Every project I completed, every glowing review, every small victory was another brick in the wall. I was building around my independence. The real moment of strategy came when I realized I could use their pride against them. My family had always cared about appearances, about showing off success and status. They thrived on perception, and they despised anything that challenged their narrative about me. I realized that I could exploit this, not through lies or deception, but through undeniable, verifiable success. If they could see it, if they could not ignore it, then their insult would crumble under the weight of reality. By mid-December, I had orchestrated a plan. I sent out carefully curated posts on social media. Not ostentatious, not boastful, but precise. A picture of a new client collaboration. A story about my business hitting a milestone. A subtle mention of a personal achievement. Nothing that screamed, "Look at me," but everything that silently said, "I am thriving without you." I knew they would see it, that they would judge it, and I knew they would be forced to acknowledge, even if only in their minds, that I was no longer the child they could dismiss so easily. Meanwhile, I reached out to a few of my cousins who I knew had always been somewhat sympathetic, subtly inviting them to my own little gathering. Nothing big, just a quiet evening with laughter, food, and warmth. I carefully timed it so that it coincided with their family Christmas. I wanted to make a point without making it obvious. I wanted them to realize that I did not need them, that I had built my own circle of happiness, my own sanctuary of celebration. When Christmas Day arrived, I wore the calmest face I could muster. I posted a single picture, a cozy, candlelit dinner, a table set beautifully, laughter echoing from my small living room. The caption was innocuous, something like, "Family is what you make of it." Grateful for love in all its forms. I knew exactly what it would do. I knew they would see it, and I knew it would sting, not because I wanted to hurt them, but because I wanted them to realize their exclusion could not break me. I was thriving in spite of their cruelty, and it worked. The responses came slowly at first. My mom's usual passive-aggressive comment about how perfect everything looked. A cousin quietly asking for a recipe. My sister scrolling past without a word, but I could see her eyes linger. I watched it unfold, my heart steady. A mixture of satisfaction and relief washing over me. They were forced to confront the reality that the person they labeled a loser had built something solid, something enviable, something completely independent. But I did not stop there. Over the next few weeks, I continued to build. Every small success, every subtle victory, every moment of independence was layered carefully. I knew that revenge in its purest, most satisfying form was not about confrontation, yelling, or shame. It was about transformation. It was about taking the pain they inflicted and converting it into fuel. I was not only surviving, I was thriving, and that, more than anything, became the ultimate answer to their disdain. I learned, too, that revenge is not instantaneous. It is not dramatic or explosive. It is slow, methodical, and deeply psychological. Each time I posted a story of my success, each time I shared an achievement, each time I smiled while recounting a personal victory to someone outside the family, it chipped away at the narrative they had imposed on me for years. They had written me off, labeled me unworthy, and yet here I was, fully alive and undeniably successful. And the best part? They could see it. They could not pretend it did not exist. By January, the dynamic began to shift subtly. My mom's text messages, once filled with thinly veiled insults, became more neutral, cautious. My sister's comments, previously tinged with mockery or superiority, softened into genuine interest, albeit grudgingly. My father, who had always tried to assert control through condescension, began to ask questions, not to belittle, but to understand. And I realized that the most profound form of revenge is not destruction. It is transformation. It is to rise above, to become so undeniably independent, so capable that the people who doubted you are left to reconcile with the reality they ignored for so long. Of course, the journey was not without its challenges. There were days when the old insecurities crept back in, moments when I doubted my worth, when the sting of exclusion felt fresh again. But each time I reminded myself of the strategy, of the careful, patient work I had done. I reminded myself of the small victories, the milestones, the undeniable proof of my resilience, and slowly, that anger transformed from a burning, destructive force into a calm, purposeful energy, a drive to excel, to grow and to thrive beyond their reach. By the time the next Christmas rolled around, the entire landscape had shifted. I was no longer excluded. Invitations came, subtly, cautiously, as if they were testing the waters, unsure of what to expect from the woman they once dismissed. But I had learned the most important lesson. I no longer needed their validation. I had built a life, a circle, a sense of self that was completely independent of their opinions. I was whole, complete, and thriving. And in the quiet moments, when I reflected on that first Christmas, the one where I was told I had no place among them, I felt a profound sense of satisfaction. Not because I had made them pay, not because I had humiliated them, but because I had transformed their narrative. I had taken the pain, the exclusion, the insult, and converted it into something far more powerful, proof of my independence, my resilience, and my ability to thrive on my own terms. The lesson, I realized, was simple yet profound. Those who try to diminish you often underestimate your capacity to rise. They focus on what they perceive as weakness, blind to the quiet strength building in the shadows. And when that strength emerges, fully formed and undeniable, there is no need for confrontation, no need for anger, no need for revenge in the traditional sense. The life you build, the achievements you earn, the confidence you exude, all of it becomes the most powerful statement possible. I remember sitting alone one evening, reflecting on everything I had accomplished since that first painful Christmas. The house was quiet, the lights dim, the tree long packed away, and yet I felt a warmth and satisfaction deeper than any holiday cheer I had ever experienced. I had done it. I had transformed the pain of exclusion into power. I had risen above the judgment, the insults, the neglect. I had created a life so undeniably my own that no one could diminish it. No one could rewrite it, and no one could take it away. And in that moment, I understood that the calmest, most effective revenge is not loud, dramatic, or vengeful in the traditional sense. It is quiet. It is strategic. It is the unwavering commitment to your own growth, your own success, and your own happiness. It is the art of thriving in spite of those who tried to keep you small, and in doing so, proving that their words, their insults, their attempts at exclusion are meaningless against a life fully lived on your terms. That first Christmas, they called me a loser. That year, they excluded me from their celebrations. And yet years later, as I reflect on it, I smile quietly. Because in the end, I did not need to confront them. I did not need to argue. I did not need to prove myself in anger. I had already won. By the time the next holiday season approached, I was in a completely different place, not just financially or socially, but emotionally. I had grown in ways I never thought possible, and that growth gave me a sense of calm I had never known before. I had spent the previous year building my life brick by brick, making choices that were mine and mine alone. I no longer needed approval from the people who had dismissed me, and that independence gave me power I had never realized I possessed. I decided that this year I would take things a step further, not out of spite, but to establish boundaries, to demonstrate that respect was no longer optional. I meticulously planned my own Christmas gathering again, but this time it was bigger. I reached out to friends I had made through work, acquaintances who had become my chosen family, people who genuinely appreciated me. I rented a small hall, decorated it tastefully, and arranged everything so that it felt warm, inviting, and full of life. On Christmas Eve, as I finished the last details, I felt a sense of satisfaction. I knew they would notice. My mom, my sister, my father, they all would hear about it, see pictures, maybe even catch wind through social media. And I knew exactly what they would feel. Curiosity mixed with envy, a subtle fear that I had created something they could not control. That realization filled me with a quiet, undeniable satisfaction. I started posting small glimpses of the preparations, nothing over the top, just images of tables being set, candles lit, small signs of life and warmth. Each post was intentional. I wanted them to see that I was not only surviving but thriving. I wanted them to understand that their attempts to diminish me had failed spectacularly, and I wanted them to realize that I no longer needed them to validate my worth. By the time Christmas morning arrived, I was calm. I enjoyed my breakfast with a sense of peace, knowing that I had orchestrated something far more meaningful than a simple family dinner. Later that day, the first reactions came. My mom sent a text that was unusually neutral. "I heard about your party. Looks nice." No insults, no condescension, just acknowledgement. My sister, ever competitive, sent a question about a dish I had prepared, and my father asked if he could swing by to see the setup later. I didn't answer immediately. I knew that part of this was patience. Their acknowledgement was small, but it was the start of recognition that I had grown beyond their petty judgments. The evening arrived, and guests started trickling in. Friends, colleagues, neighbors. I had created a space that was full of laughter, warmth, and genuine connection. People mingled, shared stories, and complimented the atmosphere I had crafted. I moved through the room calmly, engaging, smiling, listening. Each laugh, each compliment, each moment of genuine interaction reinforced the reality that I had built, something my family could not diminish. Halfway through the evening, I received a call from my mother. I let it ring a few times before answering. When I finally picked up, her voice was hesitant, almost unfamiliar. "Are you okay? It looks like everything is going well." I took a deep breath and replied calmly, "Yes, everything is wonderful. This year, I wanted to create a celebration that felt real, that felt genuine. I did not need anyone else's approval." There was silence on the other end, and I could almost hear her processing the words. That call marked a turning point. I realized that revenge, when executed through personal growth and success, is far more powerful than any dramatic confrontation. My family could see the transformation in me, could sense the strength I had cultivated, and could no longer dismiss or belittle me. They were forced to reconcile with the fact that the person they had tried to marginalize had become independent, confident, and resilient. As the night went on, my parents and sister eventually arrived. They did not enter with the pomp or entitlement they usually carried, but with hesitation, as if testing the waters. I welcomed them politely, guided them through the space, and observed quietly. The tension was palpable, but so was the difference. I could feel the shift, their acknowledgement of my autonomy, their tentative respect, the silent recognition that I was no longer the child they could control. Dinner was served, and I watched as they interacted with my friends. My sister, usually quick to criticize, found herself engaged in conversation, laughing, even asking questions. My parents were cordial, offering compliments that were carefully measured. And I realized something profound. The dynamic had changed entirely. They could no longer wield insults as weapons because I had built a life that insulated me from their judgments. I was protected by my own accomplishments, my own confidence, and my own sense of self-worth. Later that night, as everyone began to leave, I felt a sense of quiet triumph. I did not gloat, I did not make them feel small. I simply existed in my own space, calm, collected, and fully aware of the power I had cultivated. My mother lingered for a moment, and I could see the conflict in her eyes. She wanted to assert control, to belittle, but the woman standing before her was no longer vulnerable. I simply smiled, thanked her for coming, and let her leave. That was all the victory I needed. In the weeks that followed, I noticed subtle changes in my family's behavior. My sister began including me in conversations, cautiously at first, but more genuinely over time. My mother's texts became less cutting, more conversational, more neutral. Even my father, who had always maintained an air of superiority, began to engage with me differently, asking for advice, listening to my opinions, and acknowledging my achievements. The psychological shift was profound. They were no longer my tormentors. They were simply people who had to adjust to the reality of my independence. I also realized something else. The true power of this kind of revenge is internal. It is not about making them suffer. It is about transforming yourself so completely that their actions cannot touch you. I had turned their cruelty into fuel, their judgment into motivation, and their exclusion into an opportunity to build a stronger, more resilient version of myself. And that internal victory was far more satisfying than any external retaliation could ever be. As the year progressed, I continued to expand my life. I grew my business, cultivated relationships, and explored passions I had neglected in the past. Each success, each milestone, each moment of genuine happiness reinforced the lessons I had learned. My family's words no longer held power over me. Their judgment was irrelevant. I was the author of my own story, and it was a story of resilience, independence, and quiet triumph. I also began to see the long-term effects on my family. My sister, once competitive to the point of cruelty, began to seek my advice and even emulate aspects of my approach to challenges. My parents, though slow to fully adapt, began to treat me with a respect that had been absent for years. They could no longer manipulate me through shame or exclusion because I had created a life they could not control. The dynamic had shifted irrevocably, and it was liberating. Looking back, I understand now that the most powerful form of revenge is not public, not loud and not vindictive. It is methodical, patient, and deeply personal. It is the act of taking the pain inflicted upon you and transforming it into a foundation for growth, strength, and independence. When you rise above, when you cultivate resilience, when you build a life that reflects your worth, that in itself is the ultimate statement. No words, no confrontation, no spectacle is required. The truth of your success speaks louder than any insult ever could. By the following Christmas, I had reached a point of complete emotional freedom. My parents and sister were present, but I no longer needed their acknowledgement. I had built a network of people who valued me, a life that was rich in experience and achievement, and an unshakable sense of self-worth. Their past cruelty had shaped me, but it no longer defined me. I was free, and that freedom was intoxicating. And in the quiet moments, when I reflected on the journey, from the Christmas when I was excluded, to the years of careful planning, growth, and subtle triumph, I felt a profound sense of satisfaction. I had not retaliated with anger or malice. I had risen, quietly and deliberately, until I was untouchable. The family who once called me a loser had no choice but to witness my success, to confront the reality of my independence, and to reconcile with a truth they had refused to see for years. In the end, I understood something crucial. Revenge is not about punishment. It is about transformation. It is about taking control of your narrative, cultivating strength, and creating a life that reflects your true value. It is about proving, without a single harsh word, that you are more than capable of thriving on your own terms. And when you reach that point, when you are untouchable in your success and unshakable in your confidence, you have achieved something far more powerful than any act of retribution could ever provide. That Christmas, my family witnessed my evolution. They saw, quietly but unmistakably, that the person they had tried to diminish had risen above, had built a life full of meaning, joy, and success. And I knew, in that quiet, powerful moment, that I had won. Not through confrontation, not through anger, but through resilience, strategy, and unwavering determination. I smiled as the last guest left that night, the room quiet except for the soft glow of the lights I had so carefully placed. I had proven something to them. Yes, but more importantly, I had proven it to myself. I had transformed pain into power, exclusion into independence, and cruelty into motivation. And as I stood there, alone yet profoundly fulfilled, I realized the most important lesson of all. The strongest revenge is not what you do to others. It is what you become because of them. I had become untouchable.